There comes a moment in life when you look in the mirror and you don't really know who's looking back. The face is yours. The voice is too. But something just doesn't fit. You're tired, but you don't know why. You keep going, keep doing, keep smiling. But there's a silence screaming inside your chest. Like you forgot something important, but you don't know what it is. Maybe it's you, because somewhere along the way, without even noticing, you started hiding from yourself. To be accepted, to be loved, to hold on to whatever little you had. So you left pieces behind, a wish here, some anger there, a dream that felt too small to matter, until one day, it got hard to tell what's really yours and what's just a mask. The truth is, we learn too early how to shape ourselves. But living shaped is not the same as living whole. And that's why, even when everything looks right, something inside you is still begging to be free. Because life only truly begins when you stop running from who you are. Hi, I'm Noah. This video isn't some big Hollywood production. It's just a way I found to share with you what I learned about myself today through what I've been learning from Carl Jung. Because maybe the moment I'm living through feels a lot like something you're living too. So if something I say here helps you feel a little less alone, just give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, YouTube understands that this kind of content matters to you, and it'll start showing you more of it. Some days, your soul starts to speak in whispers. You feel a discomfort you can't name, a kind of tiredness that rest doesn't fix. Nothing dramatic, just that strange sense that something's off. On the outside, life keeps going. People see you, smile at you, say you're doing fine. But inside, there's a crack beginning to open, like an old voice saying, "This isn't it." You try to ignore it because you're afraid of what it might mean. But the call doesn't go away. It whispers from deep inside the psyche, like a dream that keeps returning, like a desire that refuses to die. It's the personal unconscious stirring. It's the unconscious drives, the forgotten content, the disowned traits asking to come back. You don't know exactly what you're looking for, but you feel something's missing. What's missing is you, and no amount of goals, achievements, or self-help books can fill that space. Because what wants to be seen isn't what you show, it's what you've been hiding. And when the psyche calls, it demands attention. Not with punishment, but with restlessness, with that silence that screams at night, with the emptiness that appears even when everything seems in place. This is where the confrontation with the shadow begins. And it doesn't come as a storm. It comes as absence, as the feeling that you're drifting away from yourself, even in a crowded room. The shadow doesn't always show up as fear. Sometimes it comes as a nameless longing, a quiet urge to shed the skin you've been wearing for too long. And that skin is the persona, the mask you've worn for so long. You forgot who you are without it. But your body knows, your soul knows. And even when you don't understand, it keeps calling. The symbolic language of the soul isn't logical. It shows up in dreams, in feelings, in small discomforts no one else notices. It's like your deeper self is slipping you secret notes, trying to say, there's something inside you that you forgot to live. And no matter how hard you try to live the right life, if this call goes ignored, it comes back. Sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully, but it comes. Because it doesn't want to break you. It wants to remind you that there's more to you than what the world has seen. The inner journey doesn't begin with a rational choice. It begins with this unease, with that feeling that you're in a life that doesn't recognize you, with a tightness in your chest that doesn't come from the outside. It rises from within. And even if everything looks normal, you know something is shifting. As if your soul is tired of living in pieces, as if it's finally decided to call you back, to center, to essence, to the shadow, which isn't your enemy, but a forgotten part of you. And this is where the call stops being a nuisance and becomes a guide. Pain becomes a compass. discomfort becomes the path. It's not easy, because to hear this whisper, you'll have to quiet the world's noise. You'll have to stop running. You'll have to really look inside. But that's where truth lives. Not some perfect truth, your truth. The one you left behind to fit in. The one that doesn't need applause, just space. And then, when you start listening to that call with the respect it deserves, something shifts. Not outside, inside. You begin to remember who you were before you forgot. Everything you repressed, buried, swallowed to be accepted. And that's where symbolic transformation begins. When the unconscious starts to become conscious. When you stop fighting what you feel. When the shadow is no longer a threat, but a truth. Since you were little, you learned to only show what was welcome, what worked, what others praised. And that's how, trying to fit in, you started to hide the rest. What you felt, but seemed like too much. What you dreamed, but sounded strange. That's when the mask began to form. A persona built to please, to function, to survive. Yes, it protected you, but slowly, it pulled you away from yourself. Because to fit the ego's ideal, you had to cut off entire pieces of your soul. The psyche knows when you've split yourself, when one part is shown and the other is hidden. Your personal shadow forms from that break. Repressed traits, unconscious impulses, desires you pretended didn't exist, but they do exist. And the more you try to be someone you're not, the further you drift from who you could be. The persona takes constant effort. You have to uphold the image, manage emotions, repeat the performance, until one day, you don't even know if you're living or just pretending. You feel this split as a deep exhaustion, a sense that even when you're surrounded by people, you're still a little bit alone, because no one sees what got left behind. No one knows what you had to give up just to keep the appearance. And that's where the pain lives. When you feel invisible inside your own life. Like your body's here, but your soul has stepped away. Like something in you knows you're only half alive. Psychological repression doesn't erase what's been denied. It just pushes it down. And what's pushed down becomes shadow. It becomes symptoms, emptiness, sadness with no name. It becomes silent rage, smothered creativity, frozen love. Everything you could have lived, but postponed. Because it felt wrong. Because someone said it didn't suit you. But who decided that? Who defined what parts of your soul were allowed to exist? Denying the shadow means denying your wholeness. It means living stuck in a narrow personality that doesn't embrace your full depth. It means chasing an ego ideal that doesn't leave space for contradictions. But the truth is, you're not just what works. You're also what feels too much, what fails, what wants what seems unacceptable. And as long as that part is rejected, peace won't come. Because the psyche only finds balance when everything has a place, even what you don't want to show. It takes courage to take off the mask, courage to look in the mirror and ask, who am I, beyond what I was taught to be? Not to destroy the persona, but to stop living only through it. Because the persona isn't a mistake, it's a strategy. But when it becomes a prison, it needs to be questioned. It needs to be walked through. Because the life you're longing for won't be born from the image. It will be born from the truth that got buried behind it. And that truth doesn't scream. It whispers in the discomfort, in the sadness that comes out of nowhere, in the longing to stop pretending. That's the shadow asking to be seen, not to punish you, but to remind you that there's more in you than what you show, and your soul will only breathe again when it's allowed to be whole, with light, with shadow, with everything that's yours. Have you ever asked yourself what you had to leave behind to be accepted? What part of you had to stay hidden just to fit in? Maybe it was your anger, the kind a good child wasn't allowed to feel. Maybe it was desire, too intense, too uncomfortable. Maybe it was your spontaneity, your sensitivity, your wild creativity. Things that felt like too much for others, and so became too much for you too. But what we repress to belong doesn't disappear. It just moves. It goes into the shadow. It becomes silence, shame, emptiness. And if you feel like going a little deeper, I carefully prepared a gift for you. It may look small on the outside, but it goes deep. It was made for those quiet moments when you suddenly notice you're here, but not really present. You're breathing, but not really alive. Inside, you won't find answers or fixes, but you might find a way back. Back to the parts of you that got left behind. Back to the gentle voice you stopped listening to. Back to your true self. The one that still remembers who you are. Not a better version of yourself. Not a new version of yourself. Just a whole version of yourself. You'll find the link to your gift right there in the pinned comment. So, if your soul is tired of moving through life without really feeling it, if your soul is tired of waking up and not knowing why, click the link now. The psyche doesn't forget what you tried to bury. It keeps it. It holds on to the repressed traits, the desires that didn't fit the ego's ideal. It holds the emotions you weren't allowed to feel. And one day, all of it starts to return. Sometimes as symptoms, sometimes as a kind of homesickness, because the personal shadow is made of these disowned parts of you, parts that still want to exist, even if you can't hear them. They live in your body, in your dreams, in your overreactions, in the judgments you make without knowing why. And the more you try to seem right, the more those parts feel wrong. Like they're a flaw, like your soul needs to apologize just for being what it is. That turns into guilt. It turns into shame, and into a sadness that's hard to name. The sadness of betraying yourself. Psychological repression does that. It teaches you to hide what's alive just to be loved. But love that requires you to dim your light isn't love. It's a condition, and the soul gets sick when it has to live under conditions. The unconscious beliefs you've inherited start shaping your identity without you noticing. I can't feel that. I shouldn't want this. It's not safe to be like that. And little by little, you stop being. You shrink your soul to fit into a space that was never really yours. But deep down, something resists. A part of the psyche still wants to be whole, still wants to exist without needing to say sorry. Your unconscious impulses aren't enemies. They're fragments of your truth. And when they rise, they're not here to sabotage you. They're here to remind you that what you disowned is still alive inside you. And you have the right to feel all of it, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Because the shadow isn't dirty. It's just the part that never got welcomed. And every part that wasn't welcomed will sooner or later try to find its way back. Coming back isn't simple. It's a process. Sometimes it hurts, because to find those parts again, you'll have to feel what you felt when they were rejected. You'll have to remember what it was like not to be accepted as you were. But this is where symbolic healing begins. When you stop fighting yourself, when you stop repeating the rejection you once suffered, when you start including what you once promised to hide forever. And maybe that's when you realize you were never too much. It was the world that didn't know what to do with a soul that big. And that's okay, because now you can choose something different. You can stop shrinking. You can start listening to those disowned parts with love. And finally, say to them, I remember you. And in that simple gesture, your psyche breathes. Because it never wanted perfection. It just wanted all of you. There comes a moment when nothing makes sense anymore. What once felt safe now feels suffocating. What seemed right now feels heavy, and you don't know where to stand. It's like your soul is trying to leave a body that no longer fits. The life you built around the persona begins to fall apart, and that's terrifying. You feel lost, tired, anxious, like the ground has vanished. But as chaotic as it seems, it's your psyche in motion. This is the symbolic crisis, the collapse of the ego, the moment when something has to die, so something new can be born. This is where the transcendent function begins, right where the old no longer holds, and the new hasn't yet arrived. It's a space between worlds where nothing feels real. You try to hold on to your old roles, your old certainties, images of yourself that no longer make sense. But the soul knows. It feels that continuing to pretend would betray something deep. That's why the emptiness. That's why the anxiety, because some part of you is asking to be heard, and it won't leave just because you wish it would. The collective unconscious also begins to stir. Through strange dreams, sensations you can't explain, and symbols that keep appearing over and over again. It's as if greater forces are trying to guide you out of the old structure. But stepping out hurts. Change is scary, and the fear of the unknown makes you want to return to what no longer works. This is resistance to change, a desperate attempt by the ego to stay in control. But the ego is collapsing, and that collapse is necessary. Carl Jung called this deep movement of transformation the process of individuation, a path where the collapse of the ego isn't an end, but the beginning of integration. The psyche needs this symbolic breakdown in order to reorganize itself. Chaos is fertile. Crisis is fertile, because it's through this breaking that you finally begin to see what's been hidden, what you were avoiding, what you didn't want to know about yourself. The confrontation with the shadow becomes unavoidable, and it's in that confrontation that the possibility of symbolic transformation is born, not into a new you, but into a truer one that doesn't have to fake strength just to survive. As painful as it is, the collapse is an act of truth. It's your soul saying, enough. Enough pretending. Enough hiding the pain. Enough trying to uphold an image that no longer reflects what you feel. This ending isn't failure. It's a rite of passage, a necessary deconstruction so something more honest can emerge. And even though fear screams, something inside is trying to be born. Something that no longer fits into the old clothes, old habits, or old stories. And that something is you, not the version others expected, not who you tried to become to be loved, but what remained after everything fell apart. What survived, what stayed quiet, waiting for your courage. This crisis isn't the end of your life. It's the end of the lie you had to tell to survive. And if you have the courage to walk through this desert, you'll find that what's on the other side isn't perfection. It's presence, not certainty, but truth. And that truth can finally begin to guide what's ready to be born in you. There comes a time when you can't run anymore. You feel something inside you wrestling with itself, as if two forces were clashing, one trying to hold everything together, and the other ready to break it all apart to be free. This is the battleground where the ego meets the shadow. And as much as you try to pick a side, the truth is, both are yours. You are the light that reveals, and the darkness that hides. You are the part that loves, and the one that wounds. And it's only when you stop denying that the real journey begins. Facing your inner opposites isn't a mistake. It's the soul's language. It's how the psyche speaks, through tension, through doubts, through extremes that seem to tear you apart from the inside. But it's not destruction. It's movement. It's psychic conflict showing you that life still stirs in you, that you are not shallow, that there are depths waiting to be explored. Carl Jung said that integrating the shadow means facing what the ego rejects. And that takes courage. The kind of courage it takes to stop trying to be only light. The ego-shadow relationship is like a dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes brutal. The ego wants control. The shadow wants to be seen. And in between you feel lost, tired, divided. But that division is the beginning of your wholeness. Because when you admit that there is more to you than what you've learned to show, you start remembering who you truly are. The self, that symbolic center of the soul, begins to emerge when your extremes finally meet with honesty. In this descent, into inner darkness, you don't need to fight anything. You just need to keep your eyes open. See what frightens you. Listen to what makes you uncomfortable. Welcome what feels shameful, because only what is seen can be transformed. And that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's symbolic. It's a slow symbolic transformation, where the unconscious starts to become conscious, where what was shadow becomes a bridge, where what was pain becomes access. You're not alone in this. Even when everything feels dark, there's a thread guiding the journey. The same thread that brought you here, that carried you through your own abysses. What you feel right now, the emptiness, the confusion, the loss, it's not the end. It's the crossing. It's the moment when the deepest parts of your psyche are trying to reconnect. And as much as it hurts, this is a sign that you're still alive inside. The complexes that run you, the patterns you repeat, the judgments you make without knowing why. This is the material that needs to rise, not to punish you, but to free you. Because true inner work isn't about eliminating your extremes. It's about integrating them. It's about making the unconscious conscious, about no longer living in denial of half of who you are. Deep down, you always knew this journey wasn't about becoming someone better. It was about coming home. And home, in this case, is the place where light and shadow sit at the same table. Where love doesn't demand purity, only presence. Where truth doesn't erase contradictions, it holds what was once rejected. And in this descent, your healing begins. Not as a fix, but as a return. There comes a moment when you stop fighting what you feel. Not because it gets easier, but because you realize that fighting yourself only pulls you further from home. And home, in this case, is your center. The symbolic place of the self. It's when you stop trying to erase the parts of you that feel shameful. The anger, the envy, the fear, the urge to scream, everything you once labeled as wrong starts to be met with a little more tenderness. This is where shadow work begins, the moment you choose to listen to what you once tried to silence. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean excusing everything or giving in to blind impulses. It means recognizing repressed impulses as messengers of something deeper. It means accepting that within you live forces that only want to be seen. And when they are seen, they lose their grip. They stop acting from the dark. This is the slow movement of emotional integration, when the soul starts to reorganize itself from within, and what once felt unacceptable begins to make sense, not as your identity, but as part of your psychic wholeness. Your personal shadow holds the disowned parts of yourself, the ones you swore you'd keep hidden. But when those parts are welcomed, they reveal strength, creativity, courage. They bring back the life you thought you lost. And this doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, in your everyday life, in the courage to pause instead of repressing, in the way you listen to a dream, in the second before repeating the old pattern. These are small moments of reconnection with the soul. Carl Jung said that shadow integration is essential for individuation, because as long as parts of you remain rejected, your soul stays divided, and division leads to pain. But when you begin to integrate the shadow, everything starts to shift. Your self-image softens. Your view of others becomes more compassionate. The rigidity breaks apart. And love, real love, the kind that doesn't demand perfection, finds space to exist. This is when the shadow stops being a monster and becomes a bridge, a symbolic bridge between who you are and who you became just to survive. The symbolic language of the soul reveals this through dreams, spontaneous drawings, words that touch you for no reason. Your unconscious expression starts to guide you, and you, finally, stop being held hostage by what you've been hiding. Reconciling with the shadow is the beginning of psychological healing, not because it erases the pain, but because it restores dignity to it. You begin to exist fully, with light and shadow, with flaws and strength, with everything that was once split apart. And this reunion isn't just for you. When you begin to accept yourself, you change the way you see the world. Because once you stop rejecting yourself, you no longer need to judge others to feel safe. In the end, what felt unacceptable was just the part of you that needed love the most. Not idealized love, real love. The kind that sees without trying to fix. The shadow never wanted to destroy you. It just wanted to be heard. And once you listen, it transforms. And so do you. One day you get tired. Not of living, but of performing. You grow tired of holding up the image, of pleasing, of trying to meet expectations that were never yours. The persona, which once served as armor, starts to feel heavy. And then you notice something inside you no longer wants to pretend. There's a part of you that just wants to be. Not to impress, not to prove anything, just to exist. That's when the question begins to rise. Who am I? When I'm no longer what others expect me to be. In that quiet space, something new, or maybe something ancient, starts to emerge. A presence that doesn't need applause. A listening that comes from within. The psyche, no longer forced to hide, begins to speak in a different voice. A symbolic language made of symbolic dreams, subtle feelings, images that visit you when you finally pause. What once felt like confusion begins to take shape, because the soul has its own way of speaking, and it only speaks when you stop performing. The process of individuation, as Carl Jung described it, isn't about becoming someone better. It's about becoming who you truly are. Whole. It's the journey towards psychic wholeness, where every part of you has a voice. Light and shadow. Pain and beauty. Courage and fear. Saying goodbye to the persona doesn't mean losing who you were. It means finding what was hidden behind the performance. And that real you doesn't shout. It simply stays. Present. Alive. Whole. Recurring symbols start to guide you. An animal that shows up in multiple dreams. A gesture that repeats itself without reason. A word that hits deep for no clear explanation. These are clues, expressions of your essence. The symbol of the self begins to appear, not as some beautiful theory, but as something pulsing from within. A center of truth that's been there all along, just waiting for your gaze. You begin to trust your unconscious expression, to listen with the body, to sense with the heart, to recognize what belongs to you, even if it's never been named before. And it's in that listening that healing begins. Not a magical fix, but a slow, symbolic self-healing, made of presence, made of truth, made of a quiet love for everything you are. This reunion with your essence doesn't ask you to leave the world, only not to lose yourself in it anymore. The persona might still exist as a tool, a social language, but it no longer rules, because now it's the soul that leads. And when the soul leads, life stops being a stage. It becomes a path inward, a path home. After all the fighting, all the running, all the efforts to fix yourself, you realize that what brought you healing wasn't becoming someone better. It was finally stopping the abandonment of yourself. It was looking inward with honesty. It was letting go of the life that looked right to live a life that finally felt like yours. The journey of self-realization begins here, when you're no longer chasing an ideal, but following your truth. When shadow work stops being a phase and becomes a way of living. A way of listening to what you feel without shame, of being whole, even when it's hard. The psyche now finds room to reorganize itself. It doesn't need to scream anymore. It was heard. It doesn't need to sabotage. It was welcomed. It begins to self-regulate, seeking inner balance between all the parts that once lived in conflict. You no longer have to fake strength, no longer need to control everything. Because there's a kind of psychological maturity that comes from meeting your own soul. And this maturity isn't about being hardened, It's about presence. It's knowing you can feel everything without drowning in any of it. Your unconscious expression now flows freely. It's no longer a threat, it's a compass. The symbols that once felt strange begin to make sense. The symbol of the self appears in your dreams, in your gut feelings, in words that land deeply for no clear reason. You begin living not from expectation, but from inner listening. And that changes everything, because living from inner listening means living from truth. Individuation, as Carl Jung described it, is becoming who you are on the inside, not what you were taught to look like on the outside. It's the soul returning home, and it has nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with wholeness. It means allowing every part of your story to have a place. The pain, the love, the fear, the courage, the falling, the rebuilding. It all belongs now, because all of it is you. This is the kind of psychological healing that happens without a show. One day you notice you don't react the same, that you no longer need to prove anything. That solitude doesn't scare you like it used to, because you've learned how to be with yourself. And that is freedom. The freedom to be who you are without apologizing, the freedom to stop surviving and finally start living. And that's why I'm telling you, real life begins here, when you give yourself permission to be, when you choose to meet yourself instead of hiding, when you understand you were never here to fit a script, you were here to exist with soul. Psychic wholeness isn't a fixed destination, it's a path back to what's essential. And that path now is yours. And if something I said reminded you of your own story or stirred something inside you, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd really love to hear it. What you have to say matters, not just to me, but maybe to someone else who's going through something similar. Sometimes putting it into words is already part of the healing. If something inside you still wants to understand yourself, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. And maybe what's in there is exactly what you've been needing to hear. Click it, if that's where your soul is asking to go.